If you'd open your Bibles to Mark 9. We had discussed Sunday evening in the live stream the event of the Transfiguration, which is a very unusual event in the earthly life of Jesus. We see something like it, though Scripture never, calls it a parallel or in any way materially ties together what happens with Jesus being glorified with what happened with Moses being on Mount Sinai and coming down from the mount glowing because he had been in the presence of the Lord. There are similarities between the two things. Jesus is on a mountain and Moses was on a mountain. And in close fellowship with God, in the case of Jesus here, Moses and Elijah, appearing, and it's not so much a visual image. I mean, it is, but there's something real going on between Jesus and Moses and Elijah. They're actually having a discussion. Does anybody remember what Luke, I believe it was, said they were discussing? His coming death. His decease at Jerusalem. So remember, Jesus has now started talking about the reality of what's going to happen, and it's not very far off. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be rejected by the scribes and the elders and the chief priests. I'm going to be killed, and I'm going to rise again the third day. And Peter, in Matthew 16, here in Mark, he balks at that. No, Lord, that'll never happen to you. And so there's a hurdle here of the disciples actually being able to accept the reality that Jesus is talking about. And yet there's Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration talking about this very subject with Moses and Elijah, looking backwards, if you will, at the law and the history of the Jews, perhaps Elijah representing the quintessential prophet and Moses representing the lawgiver. But at the end of that, it's interesting to note that as Elijah and Moses depart, what does God say from heaven about Peter's suggestion? This is my beloved Son, hear him. I mean, there's a very emphatic correction of Peter. Oh, Lord, let's build 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Perhaps with the desire for them to stay. Because again, I think it's Luke that notes they were about to leave. And Peter comes up with this bright idea because it says he didn't know what to say. So this is what blurts out, and the Father gives a statement of correction to that. No. You're tending to put too much emphasis on Moses and Elijah. And so you're kind of seeing a visual representation here of a shift that's taking place from the law of Moses to the new covenant. Moses and Elijah go away. God says, this is my Son, hear him. And so Jesus, he walks in this, I'll call it middle ground. He's true to the law. He teaches other people to be true to the law. But at the same time, he's preparing for something that's going to replace the law. So that's, I would say, from a human standpoint, not an easy line to walk. I suppose it's not difficult for Jesus because he's God. But he is, at times, reaffirming what the people should have understood from the law, which had been garbled by the Pharisees and by their interpretations of things and by their traditions. And so on the one hand, he's trying to say, no, this is what Moses really meant, or this is what the prophets really meant, or this is what the prophets are actually foretelling, and not yet instituting the new covenant. That is coming. And so you see the language of Jesus saying, I will build my church. It's not there yet. The kingdom is not there yet. There is a sense of kingdom in Israel. They were God's kingdom among men in an Old Testament way, in a preparatory way. But the kingdom that we come to know as being the equivalent of, if you will, the church, that is, the rule of God in the lives of people that enable them to be saved, and then they come into a saved relationship with God through Christ, that new spiritual, eternal kingdom that Nebuchadnezzar saw, for example, in the dream, way ahead of time, 500 years before, that kingdom is not yet fully come. So Jesus is living and teaching in this, it's not really an interim period. I guess you could call that, the time that he ascends back into heaven and the day of Pentecost comes, or you might even take it back to his crucifixion, since we're taught in the New Testament that the law is nailed to the cross, right? So there is something of an interim period between the end of the old and the beginning of the new. But nonetheless, Jesus is living under the law of Moses in the Sermon on the Mount, placing condemnation on those who would actually teach men to violate the law. Not one jot, not one tittle of the law will be done away with until all is fulfilled, is what he said on that occasion. So transfiguration is a mountaintop experience in two senses. One, physically. Jesus literally went up on a mountain and was transfigured. But it was also a mountaintop experience from the standpoint of what happens. Jesus is glorified in a visual sense. His clothes became white, brighter than anything that any man could have made. And so there's this physical exaltation, and then the audible acknowledgement of Jesus by God. And so that's a high, that's, of spiritual altitude, if you will. But then Jesus comes down from the mountain, and he comes down to a not so great experience. So that's where we're going to pick it up in our notes. This would be lesson 8. I know I'm not doing a whole lesson at a time, so it can be confusing. But this is lesson 8, point number 4, the healing of the demonic boy. So this is going to be Mark chapter 9, beginning in verse 14. So Justin, do you feel like reading some tonight? Mark 9, 14 through 29. Mark 9, 14 through 29. Yep, keep it through 29.
Say saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "Deaf and dumb spirit, I command to you, come out of him and enter him no more." Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him, and he became as one dead, so that many said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" So he said to them, "This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting."
Okay, well, starting with verse 29 then. This kind. Apparently, there were different, well, I use the term grades. There were different intensities. There were different manifestations of demon possession. But that's about all I know to say about that, because Scripture doesn't really go into detail as to what made this kind, and another demon, another kind. So we've seen legions of demons in two men, the men that were across the Sea of Galilee, living in the tombs and out of control and unable to participate in a meaningful way in society. So we've seen multiple demons in people. We've seen the abuse inflicted upon oneself by demon possession, physically, socially, and about every other which way. Why this was different, do not know. God simply does not give us all of the information we might be curious about relative to demon possession. But Jesus went up on some mountain. It isn't identified which one. May have been up toward Mount Hermon. We looked at the map last week and saw the area north there of the Sea of Galilee. It would be north of Caesarea Philippi, which is the area that Jesus is in. When he goes up on the mountain, who does not go with him? Well, it's easier to ask who went. It's only three names. Peter, James, and John went with him. Okay? No explanation why. They're separated from the others on 3 occasions. This is one of them. And so you have this, literally, this mountaintop experience, only to have Jesus come down from the mountain and find turmoil. And the people see him coming, and they rush to him. Our characteristic word in Mark, in verse 15, immediately. Seen that word a lot in Mark. We've noted it's more of an action gospel, telling about Jesus' doings more than his sayings. So they see Jesus coming. The people are greatly amazed, running to him and greeted him. Remember, he's been avoiding the area of Galilee now for a while. So it's almost like they're surprised to see him coming. And so they surround him, and part of the ones that are there are scribes. And so Jesus says in verse 16, "What are you discussing with them?" And so it comes out that the 9 that were left behind had this special case of demon possession brought to them. A man is asking for relief for his son who's demon possessed, and his condition is just horrific, as we read about here. If you can, for a moment as a parent, if you are one, put yourself in the position of this father and try to imagine what it was like for your son to go through this. Throwing into water, throwing into fire, and here he is laying on the ground convulsing. I mean, this would have just been a horrible situation. You would not have had, peace. You would have to keep an eye on this boy all the time in case, I suppose, though, again, it's not very clear, that fits and bouts of this would come on perhaps at different times. But the disciples were not able to cast this demon out. And so this has led to this controversy. And you can sort of imagine how that went. The scribes, the Pharisees, were always looking for something against Jesus. They were looking to neutralize his influence, and what great ammunition has been given. And remember, in regard to this kind statement, what have the disciples done already? They'd already cast demons out. When they went out 2 by 2, they were casting out demons among the other miracles that they were doing. So why on this occasion, this kind, which Jesus says comes out by prayer and fasting, I would take that to be, as a human acts in the role of an exorcist, I'll use the modern term for that, it requires prayer and fasting. Jesus didn't require that. But apparently there is something of a difference not only in the degree or level or manifestation of demon possession, there's something different in the wielding of miraculous power. It was different from Jesus exercising control over this demon and the disciples. Well, I mean, they outright failed. And then Jesus notes this is a different sort of a demon, and yet he has total command of the situation. So when Jesus hears the situation as explained, he makes this comment in verse 19. O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me. Question, then comes up, well, what does he mean by faithless generation? Well, I think on some level the apostles are included in that, because he then talks about their little faith. If you had faith, as a grain of sand, how does he put that? If you had faith, I think that may be in another reading. But nonetheless, he upbraids them for not being able to deal with the situation. And so I think that's part of it, but I also think part of it is all the things that Jesus has already done in this region. And not by his failure, but the failure of the disciples, they're seizing upon that as the pretext for opposing Jesus. So all of the evidence that he's presented, that he is the Son of God, that he is the representative of God, the spokesman, the prophet of God among the people, all that sort of goes out the window with this one situation of not his failure, but the disciples' failure. So it all gets lumped in together. And this, by all account, by what Jesus says here in verse 19, is exasperating. I don't take this verse to be some dispassionate commentary. I think he's frustrated. It's like, what does it take to convince you people? I've not done enough yet. And so he calls them a faithless generation. Remember earlier we read, he said, an evil and an adulterous generation seeks after signs. Well, an evil and an adulterous generation is even more so when the sign is given and they won't recognize it. So, it may be that here's people seizing on this as a way to oppose him. Here we've got the man himself who's understandably desperate, but yet, does he have an interest in Jesus beyond that? I don't know. But people are seeking out Jesus for what they can get from him, like the 5,000 whom he fed, and they were looking for him the next day for the next meal. So this is what Jesus is dealing with. And I think on this occasion, when you add it all up, I can't circulate throughout Galilee without being opposed. My own disciples who cast out demons before have failed, and their faith was lacking on this occasion. Here's the opponents, seizing upon an opportunity. Nothing I do, really wins them over. You can see how this sort of is built up on Jesus until he's frustrated. How long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me. I'll solve the problem. So we got our immediately again in verse 20. Immediately the Spirit convulsed him. He fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. I don't want to make light of this, but have you ever seen someone in the midst of an epileptic seizure or fit? It is not a pleasant thing to watch. It's scary. I mean, I remember as pretty much a youngster, I would have been somewhere between the ages of 10 and 12, I guess. It was in a worship assembly, and a woman sitting right in front of me had I guess you'd call it a grand mal seizure. It was severe and scared me. But this is just a horrible thing for this father to have to live with and have no relief from it. How long has this been going on, he asked? Well, Jesus would probably know the answer to that, from his divine insight into things. But I think he's wanting to affirm the details of this so one more time, everybody will get it. This is not a one-off thing. This is not a temporary situation. From childhood, this boy has been acting this way as a result of the demon possession. Thrown him into the fire, verse 22, into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. So here's the desperation. If you can do anything, it's as if the man has been so disappointed previous to the situation, likely, but in addition to that, the disciples failing. Am I going to be failed again? It's almost as if he doesn't want to trust because he's afraid he's going to be disappointed. And then Jesus says, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. I don't think he's necessarily saying, my ability to heal your son depends on your belief. That's kind of what the faith healers say today. Well, my power is limited by your faith. That's a real good out, when they fail. Well, it's your fault. I think he's trying to get deeper into this man's view of things. Are you a person of faith in God? If you are, then, great things can happen. Greater things probably than what is about to happen with Jesus casting this demon out. But don't seek for God merely because you want something. Do you have deep and abiding faith in God? If you do, you will have all kinds of divine help for whatever's ailing you in this life. But, I've always been touched by the Father's answer at this point. In 24, there's our word immediately again. Pops up a lot. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, with tears, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. What do you take away from that verse?
The fact that he's not praying for his son, but for his faith. I like it so much, and I think it's so deep to ask from God faith, to ask what is the deepest thing that you can receive from him. This is so deep and so powerful.
Yeah, I think there's a deep thought here. And I suspect those of us that would say they have faith in God have felt what this man is feeling. I think part of this is he doesn't deny that he has faith, but there's a recognition perhaps in all of us that our faith doesn't go as deep and as far as it needs to. It's probably not of the maturity. It's not as supported as it might be, that we might realize within ourselves that there are limits that ought maybe not to be there if our faith, in fact, is limited. Lord, I believe, he says. I do believe. But I also recognize within me as a person who is a believer, I'm shaky. I'm weak. Perhaps part of that weakness is he's been disappointed and he's afraid to believe. He's afraid to believe because what happens sometimes when you put so much hope and trust and confidence in something in this life? You get let down. A person fails you, a situation fails you, what you hoped would happen doesn't happen.
And very well could be, obviously, not the first time the father had probably prayed to God that his child was healed. So he's been doing this
Yeah.
And so he's, I believe in God, help my unbelief because nothing's happened,
Yeah.
those type of
Yeah.
things is my.
I mean, that would be a natural response. Yep.
So we see these ways where here he's disappointed in his apostles. They've shown in the past the ability to perform miracles. And here they are, they can't do it. We saw it previously. Hey, we saw Satan fall from heaven, we cast out demons, and then people need food, and they're like, what do we do?
Yeah.
He's frustrated. So here, he pivots away from them. He says, okay, I'm going to ask this guy. Because remember, they criticized somebody else. Well, we saw somebody casting out demons in your name, and we rebuked it. He's also trying to remind them, this isn't just for you, but your faith, you've been with me. You've done great things. Your faith is not showing here. So let me just ask this guy. And he says, if you can, and it's in our English, they put an exclamation point on it. It's not just me, it's do you have faith to do this? And his apostles get to watch this unfold after Dave couldn't heal.
Yeah.
So there's layers to that.
Yeah.
You almost see it too as kind of a lack of faith in Jesus. Because if you think about trying to cast out demons, the only way to cast it out is using God's name. So it sounds like to me that they're kind of doubting Jesus himself. And you kind of see that previously as well. So how much confidence do they even have in Jesus at this point? You start to see it a little bit, but at the same time, fully, the confidence they have in Jesus, they don't really fully
Who's the they you're referring to?
the apostles.
Okay.
I think with this father, what he does here takes a lot of courage. He obviously has faith and he admits that. But he's speaking to the Christ, which, based upon his statement, he believes he's the Christ. But to confess to Christ to his face that my faith is kind of weak right now, that's going to take a lot of courage.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not just trying to put on a show or anything.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, it sounds very genuine. I mean, this guy's been through a lot of torment. If he has prayed about it, a positive answer hasn't come yet. Are you willing to help me? He says, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. I'm not sure I take that to be a question of doubt about Jesus' ability. I think it's a doubt about the willingness. If not, I don't think he would even be approaching Jesus about this. But again, I've been disappointed. Are you willing to do anything to help us in this situation? And again, he's holding back. He's a little reluctant, but he's asking for help, even with his unbelief. Help my unbelief. Again, I would think that probably most of us have felt that need to pray to God. I thought I was a person of faith, and I've gone down in flames, on something. I've succumbed to a temptation. I've sinned in some way. I'm not as strong as I thought I was, but I'm not an unbeliever, but I'm not as strong as I need to be. Lord, help me be stronger.
We talk about the disappointment, but remember, it's not just the times he may have prayed to about it before, in days before. We're within a very short time period, potentially minutes to an hour or two, where the apostles can't do this. So we're not talking about this, yes, disappointment over time, but it's also immediate disappointment. He's coming right from, I brought him here, there's 9 of your apostles, and none of them could do anything. But, so it's also an immediate disappointment.
Sure.
Right there in that situation at that point.
Yeah. And again, you're reluctant to open up to hope or trust in this situation because am I going to be disappointed again? And so Jesus speaks, and that's it. I command you, come out, deaf and dumb spirit. The spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came. It got worse before it got better. He became as one dead. So people actually thought in this process of this exorcism, the boy died. But Jesus lifts him up. And then later, subsequently, verses 28 and 29, the disciples, to their credit, this is what disciples should do. If there's something you don't understand, if there's a failure in some way on your part or teaching you didn't get, go ask. And this is where so many of the multitudes fail Jesus. They don't get it. They're superficially interested. They're not deeply committed. They don't go and say, you know what you taught about that? I don't think I understood that. Could you explain that? And the disciples are willing to do that, and we need to be willing to do that. Why could we not cast him out? You know, they're miffed. It's as if they don't even recognize their own lack of faith, which can be a problem for us. They don't perhaps have a clear assessment of themselves. It's as if they thought they should have been able to, but they failed. Why did we fail? And so Jesus answers about the different levels or grades of possession, however we might want to work that out in our minds. Yep.
So I don't know if you have any comment about that verse 29 about prayer and fasting. Clearly, they didn't do one of those things, either praying or fasting. That's why they couldn't help that father. So I don't know if you have any comment, because I've seen in many parts of the Bible the disciples praying somehow with Jesus, but not as far as I can remember, not a lot of places they are fasting. There was even a question asked to Jesus, how come your guys they don't fast?
Right.
So I don't know if you have any comment about it. I have a lot of questions around that, but clearly if you just think by deduction, you say there is something you didn't do. Either you didn't pray, either you didn't fast. So that's why you couldn't.
Yeah, first of all, most of you probably have a notation in your Bible on and fasting. And so there's a question as to whether that was actually genuine. Okay? Be that as it may, I do think what Jesus is saying is whatever made some demons more resilient, if you will, it's going to take a close association with God and a reliance on God's power to take care of that problem. And it may be that because of the disciples' previous success in casting out demons, they began to think that they were the source of the power, that they didn't appeal to God the way they should have. Well, we've done it before, we'll just do it again. So what I take out of this is there does seem to be, because this is a different kind of a demon that requires whatever, a more potent level of divine power, if you will, to, as I said, from a human standpoint. Jesus didn't have any problem, and he didn't pray and fast. Okay? The demon was just commanded to come out. But we're not the Lord. So it may be that on the part of a human doing this sort of thing, there needed to be a closer association with the Lord and the recognition that I can't do anything in this situation. I'm going to need you to do this. And apparently they didn't do that. They did not feel that sense of dependence and that closeness and seeking out God's help. Perhaps even after they failed, what should they have done? Appeal to God even stronger. I don't know why it failed, but Lord, help us deal with this situation. I don't know what all's behind it. But apparently, by what Jesus says, is they weren't strongly enough connected to God, and perhaps were relying on their own strength, which could have come from their past success. That's one thing I think the disciples are in the process of learning, is any success we're going to have in this apostolic work endeavor is going to be by close association with God, and it's not going to be by their own strength. And they're going to manifest a lack of understanding about that by their fussing about which one of them is the greatest. It's not that sense of humility and submission to God that they need if they're going to be successful in the long run. So it's a lesson that needs to be learned, certainly here, because they're going to have to go out and deal with a whole lot more difficult situations than what they're dealing with here, and they failed. I don't know if that helps at all. Anybody got another thought? Who said that? Yeah.
So, one of the things that also isn't, it doesn't go into details and it doesn't get into the after the fact stuff, but You see the argument going back and forth. But when Jesus shows up and does cast it out, you don't have any, and the scribes were scratching their head here, or
Yeah.
did they go back to the elders and, Pharisees say, hey, this guy's for real? That's not explained. Similar to like when Lazarus, when he raised from the dead, what's the, follow one to that? You gotta kill this guy.
Yeah.
We can't deny he's doing miracles. We gotta get rid of him. So, that same, you would think that their mentality would change because they're, apostles can't do it. He's a phony. Oh, he just did it himself. Never mind.
You'd think.
You would think. But
You'd think.
that's not expanded upon here in this part. But
Yeah.
obviously, it didn't change anybody's mind on the scribes and Pharisees.
No. And neither will, resurrection from the dead. The human ability to rationalize around the truth, around the obvious is tremendous. And you see it over and over and over again. And this is just another example. Yeah, you would think they would have gone out and said, oh man, I thought we had him. But no, he's the real thing. But we don't really get a sense of that happening. 30 through 32. Chris, you want to read that for us?
Then they departed from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know it. For he taught his disciples and said to them, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after he is killed, he will rise the third day. But they did not understand this saying and were afraid to ask him.
Okay, so similar passage in Matthew 17 talks about them being exceedingly sorrowful at the words of Jesus. It's as if, I don't even want to ask him about this because it sounds like bad news and I don't want to hear more bad news. So now they begin making the mistake of not asking. They've been doing a better job of seeking out information and asking what Jesus meant when they didn't understand, but now they're afraid to ask. And he's just upbraided them. And on various occasions, Jesus will say, do you not yet understand? He's already had some words for them about the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees, and they thought it was about not taking lunch. And it's like, eye roll, do you not get it yet? So there's a reluctance here out of dread. I mean, you ever done that? You ever not ask somebody a question you might really need to ask them because you're afraid it's going to be bad news? So you just avoid it. And that seems like what they're doing here, but that's not the way to handle this because it's coming whether they acknowledge it or not. And that's true in life. If we got bad news coming, well, it's going to be bad news whether we ask about it and find out about it and are open to it or not. It's still going to be bad news. Maybe we better open ourselves up to it and say, okay, then how do I prepare for this? And that's not what the disciples are doing at this point. Let's go on, 33 through 37. Danny, you want to read that for us?
Then he came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what was it you disputed among yourselves on the road? They kept silent, for on the road they had disputed among themselves who would be greatest. And he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, if anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. Then he took a little child and set him in the midst of them. And when he had taken him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one of these little children in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me.
All right, so it's kind of odd maybe when you think about they just failed, but now they're having this debate, of which of them is the greatest. And we see in James and John and their mother, ballpark mom, she wants her sons to have the chief places, the right hand and the left hand. And guess who just went up on the mountain with Jesus? Peter, James, and John. So we don't have the detail here as to who is arguing for what, but it sure wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility in what we already know about James and John. And then Peter being included in this, he was with Jesus. The three of them were with Jesus in the raising of Jairus' daughter. They're going to be the ones that will go with Jesus away from the others in the Garden of Gethsemane. So it wouldn't be hard to see in this, would it? That Peter and James and John are arguing with the other 9? Well, you don't deserve to have the highest place. You know, we were with the Lord on the Mount of Transfiguration. We came down. You all failed. You know, we're the triumvirate here. We're the top 3. I don't know how deeply it got into that kind of division, but what did we just read? I mean, you have to have some kind of discernment here, I think. We just read about the exaltation of the 3 of them and the failure of the other 9. Whatever all is brewing here, it comes out in this, you know, you can maybe have this mental picture. Here's Jesus resolutely walking along the pathway, and the disciples are back in the back, and they don't want him to know what they're talking about, and they're, you know, whispering under their breath when he already knows everything anyway, and he's already displayed that ability. But they're having this debate, and they get to whatever house in Capernaum, maybe Peter's, that's where he's been before, but he gets to this house and then questions them. Oh, by the way, I heard y'all having a conversation on the road. What was that about? You know, sometimes you ask questions you already know the answer to. I mean, if you're a lawyer, that's what you do, right? Right, Kimberly? You ask questions you already know the answer to. Never ask a question you don't know the answer to. So, what was that y'all were talking about? So, they didn't want to answer that. They kept silent, for they were disputing about this. So then Jesus creates this object lesson for them by bringing a child to him, took a little child, set him in the midst of them when he had taken him up in his arms. So there's this embrace of this child. And then he says, whoever receives one of these little children in my name. So he adds, though, here in verse 35, in various places, Jesus gives us insight into the value structures of the kingdom. And they're very different than what we're accustomed to thinking about in this earthly situation that we're in. We live in, we just saw it last night. If you braved the debate, I made it about 33 minutes, I think, 31, 33, before I couldn't take it anymore. But what do we see in this world? We see people vying for supremacy. We see unbridled ambition. We see people, not in the presidential context, but others that are willing to kill others to gain supremacy, to get some primary position or role or acquire something. And so we live in a world of carnal competitiveness, and the disciples have imbibed that spirit from their own age. They don't want to just be in the kingdom. They want not just to be in close association with Jesus. They already all are, the 12. They want to be superior over each other. And so Jesus says, if anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. So I don't think that's to be taken literally in the sense of, as long as you want to be really great in the kingdom, just make sure you're serving people. And then everybody will see that you're a servant, and they'll praise you for it. That's not the attitude either. The attitude is, and this is, behind the word meekness, don't think about yourself at all. The true idea of humility and meekness is the freedom to not think about yourself at all. It didn't work last night. I read a statement from Chris Wallace, who was the moderator. He said, my main job in the debate tonight is to not even be noticed. That didn't work. Everybody noticed him trying to corral, the two yahoos on the stage there. So, in a sense, that's what it is in the kingdom. We strive, in a sense, to not be noticed. That we're not out there in the front and putting ourselves up and vying for position and wanting to dominate It's more or less, what can I do for you? What need do you have that I can help supply?
It's amazing that if you read these last three verses, how Jesus sort of accomplished another miracle. In a sense, they didn't tell him what they were talking about, how he could read what they were thinking. And we usually go through quickly, but look at that.
Mm-hmm.
They were hiding. I think somehow they knew that that question is not good.
Our answer is not going to flatter ourselves.
Yes, I think somehow they knew that.
Yeah.
Answering this question, we know this man.
Yeah.
He's going to tell us, and then we don't want to add because he has been telling them again and again. You guys, you don't get it, you don't understand it. It's not good to hear those. I mean, I remember learning something sometime in school. The teacher is telling you, 5 times, 6 times. The 7th time you don't get it, you say, I'm not asking anymore because I don't.
Yeah.
So I think, but here, look at how Jesus, again, not even getting the feedback of the answer, he knew. Some of those miracles that we just pass through quickly.
Yeah, and they didn't get it. I mean, they're having this argument as if Jesus has no clue because they're talking under their breath or they've got, a 20-yard separation between whatever they're doing. I don't know. But how could, at this point, you assume that Jesus doesn't know what you're talking about? But, sometimes we do that. We do similar kinds of things. And as long as the elders don't find out about it, it's okay. Well, we would never do that, would we? Okay, so let's move on. 38 and following. Now, John answered it. Well, maybe just, the child is brought in as an object lesson, I think. We learn unbridled ambition. We learn from culture to want to dominate people, to put people underfoot. It doesn't usually come out naturally in a child. And children, by nature of being children, are under everyone anyway. They're in a humble, subordinate role. But it's not to say that all children have a naturally humble spirit. But I do think, even though you got strong-willed children and you got compliant children and everything in between, you still see that children, over the course of their development, learn the dog-eat-dog, take the hill kind of mentality. It's not really the natural state of a child. And so Jesus is using, I think, this child as that sort of an object lesson. Whoever receives one of these little children in my name receives me. The humility. Remember the disciples? I don't know that we've read it yet in Mark, but they're going to reprove the parents, bringing the children for Jesus to bless them. They want to send the children away. We don't need to be bothered by that. We're with somebody important here, and he's got important things to do. Take your child away. And Jesus, no, you missed it. You missed the point. In a very real sort of application, I had to learn as a preacher, it was just as important to get up in front of 10 people somewhere in a gospel meeting and preach and do your very best as it is to preach to 100 or to preach to 500. And if we're going to rank things, like the world ranks, and we're going to, shortchange someone because, well, you're not really one of the important people. So I got a few minutes for you, but I really need to spend my time elsewhere. Then we had a problem. We have uninverted, what Jesus inverted. We're putting it back the way the world looks at things. And Jesus says, no, it's about serving. It's about serving everybody. It's about exalting the small among the Lord's people and not letting the carnal competitiveness and ranking of people. We learn this from 1 Corinthians 12 and the example of the body, and the church being a body, and all the parts of the body are important. Well, let's go down to 38 real quick before we close here. Now, John answered him saying, Teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he does not follow us. But Jesus said, do not forbid him. For no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterwards speak evil of me, for he who is not against us is on our side. For whoever gives you a cup of water to drink in my name because you belong to Christ, assuredly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. Kind of a moot question. What is John seeking in bringing this up? Is he seeking clarification? Is he seeking to deflect Jesus' criticism of them? Is he seeking praise for what he did? Or is he saying, did we do the right thing? Don't know. Again, it's one of these things we don't have an explanation of. What was John's motive in bringing this up? But what does come out of this is a warning and a teaching of the Lord against what might be called sectarianism. It may say that in the heading, of this section in your Bible. Mine says, Jesus forbids sectarianism. Dividing up and separating oneself from others for illegitimate reasons. It may be that in life we have to separate ourselves from people that are acting sinfully or perhaps committed to a doctrinal position that involves, a sinful outcome in some way. It may be that we have to separate ourselves from people at times. But when we do it without a legitimate reason, we become sectarian. Again, this is 1 Corinthians 1 through 4. I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Cephas, I'm of Christ. They were using the values of their culture to split themselves off from legitimate apostles. And Paul basically argues, why would you do that? All things are yours, he says further over in chapter 3. All things are yours. God gave you Peter. God gave you Paul. God gave you Apollos, who's not an apostle, but a very effective preacher. And God gave you Christ. He gave you all of that. Why would you now want to separate out the ones that you think aren't quite as worthy as the others and then block yourself off from that blessing of being in association with them? It's called cutting off your nose to spite your face. Why would you do that? Well, because you've allowed carnal competitiveness to get inside of you. And you think there's more prestige in being associated with Peter than Paul, or vice versa. So this situation brings up lots of questions. Again, we don't have answers to. But apparently, by the way Jesus describes it, the man, and by what John says, he was legitimately casting out demons. So it doesn't appear that this was, something false going on, but he was actually doing it. Now, who was the man? Don't know. How did he get the power? Don't know. That's not explained in the story. But nobody in the story questions, either Jesus or the apostles, whether the man was actually doing it. What was John's pretext for telling him not to do it? He doesn't follow with us. He's not one of us. He's not in the preferred group. Well, guess what? That's what the Pharisees had done to Jesus. You're not in the preferred group. And so when Jesus works miracles, they deny them. When this man's working a miracle and casting out demons, the attempt is made anyway to deny him that. And John says, in essence, do we get credit for that? And Jesus says, no, you didn't act right.
One thing I was going to say is kind of go along with some of the things you said was, I wonder if it's Jesus being kind of a celebrity, the apostles started to kind of miss the point. Missing when he fed 5,000, he's like, oh, well, who's going to feed the 4,000? And they started to miss what Jesus, who he was. And here's some random guy, not only looking at Jesus as a random person, but he's looking at Jesus as God in a way that he used his name to cast out demons. And that's when I think in verse 29 point before, Jesus just said prayer and fasting. Well, when I read that, the apostles were not relying on Jesus, and then the fasting, they weren't trying to recognize that Jesus is all they needed to do the casting out demons. And so I wonder if Jesus is making the point that you're missing who I am. And then later on, you start to see that the apostles, even after Jesus died, they finally get it.
Yeah, that may enter into it. I mean, it does explicitly say he's casting out demons in your name. They acknowledge that. And they failed to do that. But I think the underlying point here is they discredited him because he wasn't in the elite group. He wasn't one of us. And were they privy to everything Jesus did? Did Jesus give this man this ability in some direct way in a private conversation somewhere? But they don't know that, so they put themselves in a really bad position to intercede, negatively and tell him. They said, we forbade him, and then in verse 39, Jesus said, do not forbid him. It's not a good thing when we end up, advocating the very thing the Lord would do the opposite way. All right, let's go ahead and call it there. We're a little bit past. Thank everybody for their comments and hope that was a helpful discussion for all of us.